Number 16. If you think you can solve this one on your own, pause the video, solve the problem on your worksheet, and then press play to follow my steps and see if your final answer matches mine. I'm going to begin by identifying what I can replace in this equation. The first equation tells me that a y is the exact same thing as negative 5x. That means that where I see a y in this equation, I can take it out and I can substitute it with negative 5x. I'm going to rewrite my second equation, 7x plus 2, except instead of a y here, I'm going to take that y, the y out, and I'm going to replace it with 5x, because 5x is the same thing as y. Negative 5x equals 3. Now I've got a little bit of work to do. Any number next to parentheses means that you need to multiply. In this case, there's only one thing inside the parentheses to multiply by. So I've got 2 times negative 5x. Well, I know 2 times 5 is 10, so positive 2 times negative 5 is negative 10x. I still have to bring down the 7x and the equals 3. My plus sign that is sitting right here, I could bring it down, but I don't really need to because my negative 10x can turn into a minus sign so that I have 7x minus 10x. Now, in order to make my railroad tracks and start solving, what I need is to figure out how many total x's I have. Here it says I have 7 positive x's, and here it says I have 10 negative x's. If I add those up and combine them, that gives me a total of negative 3 x's. And that is still equal to 3. That hasn't changed. I can now make my railroad tracks. Divide each side by negative 3 so that I can isolate y. And x equals positive 3 divided by negative 3, which is negative 1. So I'm halfway done with my final answer. My final answer has to be a coordinate pair with an x and a y. I just found out my x is negative 1. And now I've got to go back and calculate what y is. In this first equation, way back at the beginning, they told me how to calculate y. They said if you want to calculate y, you take negative 5 and multiply it times whatever the x is. Remember that a letter next to a number means multiply. So I just filled in my invisible multiplication dot there. I'm going to rewrite this equation. Y equals negative 5 times x. I'm going to take this x here, which is negative 1. And if I can multiply those two, I'll calculate y. Well, 5 times 1 is 5. A negative 5 times a negative 1 is positive 5. So my y number is 5. My final answer, the place where these two lines cross on the graph, is negative 1, 5. Number 17 gets a little more complicated. In number 17, I've got an entire expression here, 6y plus 7, that is equal to x, which means wherever I see my x number in the second equation, right here, I can replace it, but I have to replace it with this whole thing right here, this whole expression. So when I rewrite my equation, I'm going to rewrite 2, because the 2 is there, we can't change it. Then instead of an x inside the parentheses, I'm going to replace it with this whole statement that is exactly equal to x. 6y plus 7. Now I still have a plus 6y equals 14 from my original equation. Plus 6y equals 14. Now I've got this invisible multiplication dot again. Remember, when you have a number next to parentheses, there's a multiplication dot there. So I've got to take this 2, multiply it by 6y, and multiply it by 7. We did this a long time ago, called the distributive property. Well, 2 times 6y is 12y, because 2 times 6 is 12, and I can't leave the y off. And 2 times 7 is positive 14. I'm going to add my 6y that's still there, and that equals 14. Now, before I make my railroad tracks and move on, I have to pay attention to this. I've got some of my y's over here, 12 of them, and some of my y's over here, 6 of them. I have a total of 18 y's, because 12 plus 6 is 18. I still also have a plus 14 that I've got to write down, and that equals 14. Now that I've got my variable down to 1, I can make my railroad tracks and start solving my equation. When I have a number, 2 numbers, and I have one over here by itself and one attached to the y, I always start with this one over here. It's much easier to get rid of that one by just subtracting. I have a positive 14, so I'll use a negative 14 to cancel. And I have 18y equals 0, because 14 minus 14 is 0. Now to completely isolate y, I'll divide by 18. And I have y equals 0, because 0 divided by anything is always going to be 0. My final answer is halfway done. My final answer is up here, my xy coordinate pair. My y, we just found out, is 0. Now I've got to use that to go back and calculate my x. Well, in this equation, they told us that if we knew our y number, we could multiply it by 6 and then add 7, and that would give us our x number. So I'm going to rewrite that statement right here. And since I know my y and I can substitute it, I'll put parentheses around that as well. I'll replace my y with 0, since that's what y is, plus 7. If I follow PEMDAS, I've got to multiply first. 6 times 0 is 0. X equals 0 plus 7. Well, that means x is 7. And I can put that up in my final answer. I can get my popcorn cloud around that. And I've just proven that these two particular lines cross at 7, 0. Now there's a point. If you can do some of this math in your head, if you can figure out that 6 times 0 is 0 plus 7 is 7, you don't need to write all this, but you have to make sure you get the right answer. So if you're not positive, it's a good idea to write it. Next is number 18. Number 18 is a lot like number 17. In this problem, they're telling us that the variable y is equal to 8x minus 8. So I'm going to go into my other equation, take out this y, and replace it with 8x minus 8. I'll start rewriting. I have negative 2x plus 4. Now here's where my replacing starts. I'm going to take the y out of the red parentheses that are right here, and I'm going to replace it with this, which is equal to y. 8x minus 8 equals negative 2. Now I've got to focus on this multiplication here. Remember, when you have a number right next to parentheses that has an invisible multiplication sign, there are two things here I need to multiply by 4. I've got 4 times 8x, which is 32x, and 4 times negative 8, which is negative 32. I still have equals negative 2,